President Biden has warned that American democracy is facing its most significant threat since the Civil War, as Republican-controlled states tighten rules on voting. It all follows Donald Trump's claims of fraud in the 2020 election. David Willis reports.
In America's birthplace, Philadelphia, the president warned of a new threat to the ideals on which this nation was founded.
So hear me clearly. There's an unfolding assault taking place in America today, an attempt to suppress and subvert the right to vote and fair and free elections, an assault on democracy, an assault on liberty, an assault on who we are as Americans.
We must stop the steal, and then we must ensure that such outrageous election fraud never happens again.
Donald Trump's claims of voting irregularities have prompted more than a dozen Republican-led states to pass laws restricting the right to vote. Republicans say the measures will enhance election security. Democrats say they will deter black and low-income voters, who form a sizable part of their base, from casting their ballots. To press the point, more than 50 Democratic lawmakers from Texas flew into Washington, D.C. this week in order to delay a vote on changes to election laws back at home. Despite the state governor's threat to have them arrested, they have no immediate plans to return.
We are here in D.C., our nation's capital, because we want to protect the civil right to vote for millions of Texans. That's why we need Congress to act now and pass the For the People Act.
But a move by Democrats to counter the Republican measures and put legislation in place that would expand voting rights across the country is currently stalled in the U.S. Congress. The president has called passing the For the People Act a national imperative, but he doesn't have the votes in a narrowly divided Senate to get it passed into law. So for now, his only option seems to be drawing attention to what he's calling the biggest threat to American democracy since the Civil War, in the hope of rallying support amongst Democratic voters and luring them to the polls.
God bless you all.
With control of Congress up for grabs in next year's midterm elections, it's hardly the option he would have been hoping for. David Willis, BBC News, Los Angeles.
Well, let's cross live to New York now. And the CBS News correspondent Laura Podesta is there for us. Thank you very much, Laura, for joining us. Pretty strong words there from President Biden. How frustrating is this for him?
Absolutely. In that fiery speech that you just heard in Philadelphia yesterday, he likened a lot of the laws that Republicans are trying to put forth, limiting voting access, to Jim Crow era laws that made racial segregation legal and denied African Americans the right to vote. So we know that since President Biden was elected, legislatures in 17 states, in red states, have passed 28 laws making it more difficult to vote. And some of those laws include banning drive-through voting, making it illegal for someone to register to vote through an application that was sent in the mail, and limiting early voting access. Mariam.
What's the Republican response been to all this then, Laura?
Former President Trump, as you heard in the story right before you came to me, has continued to say that the 2020 election was based on voter fraud, that he was the rightful winner of that election despite no evidence to support his claims. Republicans believe that by passing these voting laws, they will be ending any potential future fraud in future elections and making voting more secure here in the U.S. Texas Democrats, though, have now fled to Washington, D.C. They've left Austin, Texas, in order to avoid voting on a voting bill there that is supported by Texas Republicans, in order to make sure that they are protecting their constituents' right to vote. That is their argument. The Republican governor in Texas, though, Greg Abbott, he said that he is going to be arresting these Democrats, these Texas Democrats, upon their return to Texas, and that he will be holding special session after special session all the way until next year's election in order to get a voting bill passed.
It all sounds really messy, doesn't it, politically, Laura? What are the potential outcomes, do you think, here?
Well, I think that the worst case scenario is that you have disenfranchised voters who cannot get to the polls, whether it's due to disability and they're no longer allowed to do drive-through voting because one of those laws was passed, or perhaps someone who is trying to juggle 4 jobs and was relying on early access, getting to a poll at 6 in the morning when it opened its doors, who can no longer vote because early voting has been canceled due to these laws being passed. And so, a worst case scenario is just an unjust democracy where voting is much more difficult. Of course, when you take the conservative standpoint, the Republican standpoint, they would argue that the best case scenario is that these laws are passed and that voting is more secure. And you don't have elections where someone is voting for someone else, or perhaps you have a dead person's ballot that's able to be put in the ballot box. Again, though, there has been no evidence, I want to reiterate, no evidence of widespread voter fraud based on what we saw in the 2020 election.
Okay, Laura Podesta, as always, it's really good to talk to you. Thank you so much.